What does "in" mean? Realm, participation, and life in Paul. If we are going to understand the language of Romans, we must first clear away a confusion that has followed readers for a long time. When Paul says a person is in Christ, in the Spirit, in the flesh, or in Adam, many instinctively imagine something spatial or metaphysical, as if a person were somehow located inside another being or acted upon by an invisible force. Once that picture is in place, the rest of the argument becomes difficult to follow. But Paul does not leave us guessing. He explains his own language, and when we allow him to do that, a consistent pattern emerges. The word translated "in" is the Greek preposition "en." Like the English word "in," it can describe location, but it is often used to describe condition, association, or sphere of life. We say things like "in trouble," "in love," or "in fear," and no one imagines physical containment. We understand these as ways of describing a person's state or the reality in which they are operating. Paul uses "in" this same flexible way. The question is not what the word can mean in isolation, but what it means in context. And in Romans 8, Paul gives us the clearest explanation. He writes, "Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit." Romans 8:8-9. If we stop there, we might still be unsure what "in the flesh" or "in the Spirit" means. But Paul immediately explains these categories through a series of parallel descriptions. He speaks of those who walk according to the flesh and those who walk according to the Spirit. Romans 8:4. He describes those who live according to the flesh and those who live according to the Spirit. Romans 8:5. He adds that those who are aligned with the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, while those aligned with the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. Romans 8:5-6. He goes on to speak of being led by the Spirit and of putting to death the deeds of the body by the Spirit. Romans 8:13-14. This is decisive. Paul is not describing physical location or a mystical substance. He is describing a way of life. To be in the flesh is to live under the direction of self-centered desire, to think and act from that center. To be in the Spirit is to live under the guidance of the Spirit, to set one's mind on what is right and to act accordingly. The "in" language is defined by walking, living, thinking, and acting. The same pattern appears when Paul speaks of being in Christ. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, he writes, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation." This does not mean a person is physically located inside Christ. It means that a person has entered into a new reality, a new order of life. The old framework has passed, and a new one has begun. When Paul says that God has blessed us in Christ, Ephesians 1:3, he is describing the reality in which those blessings exist. They are bound up with Christ and belong to what God has established in Him. We receive them as those who belong to that same reality. The phrase therefore identifies both the sphere of blessing and the relationship through which it is given. When we turn to the language of Adam, the pattern holds. Paul writes, "For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive." 1 Corinthians 15:22. Again, the contrast is not spatial, but corporate and participatory. Adam represents a humanity marked by sin and death. Christ represents a humanity marked by righteousness and life. To be in Adam is to belong to that first order. To be in Christ is to belong to the second. Paul's argument in Romans 5 reinforces this. He does not say that all people were physically inside Adam when he sinned. Rather, he shows that sin and death entered through one man and spread to all, because all participate in that same pattern of sin. Romans 5:12. Adam stands as the head and representative of a way of life that others share. Christ stands as the head and representative of a new way of life into which others may enter. At this point, the pattern is clear. Across all of these expressions, in consistently describes a relationship to a governing reality. It includes participation, allegiance, and belonging. It is not merely external imitation because it involves real connection and identification. But neither is it a mechanical or spatial containment that overrides human agency. It is a lived participation in a particular order of life. This reading is not unique to one interpretation. It is broadly supported in Pauline scholarship. Constantine Campbell, in his detailed study of Paul's language, argues that expressions like "in Christ" are best understood through a cluster of ideas: union, participation, identification, and incorporation. These terms describe real relationship and shared life, not mere metaphor, but they also do not require a literal, spatial understanding. N.T. Wright similarly describes Adam and Christ as two solidarities or two humanities, each with its own defining characteristics and outcomes. James Dunn speaks in terms of spheres or powers that govern human existence. Though their terminology differs, they converge on the same point. Paul is describing belonging and participation within a governing order. What then does it mean to be in Christ? It means to belong to Christ's order of life, to share in what he has established, to live under his lordship, and to participate in the reality shaped by his death and resurrection. What does it mean to be in the Spirit? It means to live under the Spirit's guidance, to have one's thinking directed toward what is right, and to act in line with that direction. What does it mean to be in the flesh? It means to live under the pull of self-centered desire, to be governed by that orientation. And what does it mean to be in Adam? It means to belong to the old humanity characterized by sin and death. In every case, Paul makes his meaning clear by the verbs he uses. He speaks of walking, living, setting the mind, being led, presenting oneself, and putting to death. These are not the actions of someone passively contained within a substance. They are the actions of a person actively living within a particular framework. This is why the language matters so much. If we misunderstand "in," we will misunderstand everything that follows. We will either imagine that change is automatic, as though a force takes over, or we will reduce the Christian life to external imitation. Paul allows neither. He describes a real participation in a new order of life that reshapes how a person thinks and acts, while still calling for conscious, meaningful response. When Paul says, "There is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus," Romans 8:1, he is not describing a detached status floating above reality. He is describing people who now belong to a new realm, who live under a new lordship, and who are no longer bound to the old pattern. And when he says that the righteous requirement of the law is fulfilled in those who walk according to the Spirit, Romans 8:4, he is showing that this new belonging is not abstract. It is lived. The word "in," then, carries far more weight than it first appears. It is the doorway into Paul's entire way of thinking. It tells us not where a person is located, but to whom they belong, under what they live, and within what kind of life they now move. Once that is understood, the rest of the argument begins to fall into place.